The Prophet Muhammad told us that whoever builds a mosque for Allah, Allah will build for him a similar house in Jannah. And we know the great reward that will not only be gained, but rather will fill your grave after your death. Whenever someone prays there, whenever someone gives shahada in the masjid, whenever someone learns something in the masjid, yes, that will be something that you'll have on your scale. There's one thing we can all agree on, that the universe is regular, stable, uniform, the extent to which it allows life to exist within it. From every small atom to the largest of celestial spheres, we see incredible goal-directedness within the cosmos. Now the question is, what is the best explanation for that? Is it a source of knowledge, or is it a lack thereof? This is the question that must be asked. Is it a source of knowledge, or is it a lack thereof? Another question that could be asked is that, did something come from nothing? Is it conceivable, intelligible, or plausible for something to come from nothing, that the universe came from nothing? Did the universe generate and cause itself? Well, to suggest that the universe was generated or caused itself is tantamount to saying that a mother gave birth to herself. And to suggest that there's more than one ultimate source of being, more than one necessary existence, is tantamount to saying that you can have more than one mother to one sole child. Therefore, it is clear that monotheism, the idea of one source, that is the foundation for everything that exists, is the only reasonable conclusion. Another question that must be asked is, what is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of life? Imagine going into work. You don't know who your boss is. You don't know what your role is. You don't know what you're doing there. But here we are in the career of life, and we don't know what our purpose is. The purpose of life is to align the finite with the infinite. The purpose of life is to submit to the lawgiver. The purpose of life is to submit to the ultimate source of all creation. That's why prophets and messengers were sent aforetime. Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and for us, the final prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And these prophets came to expound on this truth, to tell people to submit to God. And they came with an evidence for their prophethood. As for the Prophet Muhammad, his evidence is that he came with a preserved religion. The Quran is preserved in a way that no other ancient book is. There's a falsification test within the Quran, challenging humanity to find a contradiction within it, challenging humanity to try and produce a chapter like it. And the Prophet of Islam made predictions that were so frequent and so precise that no other figure in human history made them. For example, he told us that the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire would both fall to the Muslims. Now, according to Barnaby Rogerson, who is a historian, non-Muslim historian, he said that the similitude of the Arabs at that time taking over the Persian and Roman Empire is the same as Eskimos taking over Russia and America. Imagine what kind of a wild prediction this is. And this is one of many predictions that obviously I don't have time to expound here. The question is, what does atheism have to offer? Atheism has no explanatory force whatsoever. Atheism is a negation. Atheism has no ontological status. Atheism cannot describe or explain morality, rationality, consciousness. Atheism brings nothing to the table. With that, I conclude with Assalamu Alaikum wa Rahmatullahi.
Same question? And then could you restate the question for me?
So the question is, in the world between Western secularism and Islamic Christians, which moral system is produced the most stable, compassionate, and just society, and why?
So I would say that secularism, as the foundation for, at the very least, the system of governance that we have, and the way that our laws and the way that we dictate how we conduct ourselves, I think is superior to any individual religious system because it allows for all these different viewpoints to come together. I think that it is no coincidence that we are in a relatively secularly governed country where we have the ability for somebody to speak on their religion and they can say what they want about it, they can have their beliefs about it, and I have the ability, or anybody else here has the ability to disagree with that particular viewpoint, but there's still room in society for that viewpoint. I would say that one of the foundational errors or one of the foundational mistakes or incompatibilities that the more fundamentalist approach or the more hardcore approach to religion has led to is the intolerance in certain societies of other types of beliefs. So whether that is the way that you conduct yourself and how you do comedy or speech, whether that's the way that you set up your particular neighborhoods, whether that's the types of laws that you pass to allow freedoms for other people in society, especially people that have traditionally been oppressed by systems of governance. Could be different types of minority figures, it could be women, it could be people of LGBT status. I think that the more secularized society is superior because it creates space for all of those people to exist together in a system that is functional. I think that there is some conversation to be had about the nature of existence. I do think that it's nice that religion gives us easy answers in all of our big branches of philosophy. You don't have to do much ethics, much metaphysics, much epistemology when it comes to figuring out religious beliefs because all the answers are kind of there for you, and maybe that allows you to explore other things in life. But when it comes time to arguing those things to other religious people, the last I checked, I don't think that Islam or Christianity or Judaism have settled their disagreements between who is the one true religion, Abrahamically, or any of the other number of religions that people choose from. So I think that in terms of societal progression, in terms of the moral progress you could say that we've seen as a society, I think that a larger secular umbrella has allowed this to happen. I don't think it is a coincidence that people find themselves moving more, and we'll talk about immigration later, to these more Western secularized societies because these societies have such specific carve-outs for different types of beliefs and different types of religions to exist and to express themselves. And I think that having these countries change back to regress into a more religious state, into a more fundamentalist state, where all of us are required to have a particular religious belief, I think would be a regression in the, I would say, philosophical progress that we've made as a society, or as multiple societies, because, the idea of being able to enforce your religious ideology or your dogma on some particular group of people, I think is an idea that was tried in the past and hasn't produced the societies that have the most flourishing today, which I would say are the ones that are more secular and do allow for more different points of view.
Well, I mean, Destiny mentions that secularism is superior to religion. But secularism couldn't exist without it, because secularism is, by definition, a separation between church and state. So how can you have secularism without the church? You would just have something else. So it can't be superior to it because it incorporates it into its worldview. But the question really is, what's the objective basis for all of his claims? He mentioned LGBT and minority, this, that, and the other. The question is, as an atheist who believes that we are essentially atoms whizzing around. This is the physicalist. This is the materialist assumption. How can you get from that to objective morality in the first place? How can you ascertain that liberalism is the superior ideology from first principles, from a scientific or mathematical perspective. You can't do that. It's not possible because Kant couldn't do that, because J.S. Mill couldn't do that, because greater people than me and you couldn't do that. Therefore, you won't be able to do that. Secondly, I will say this. I mean, he mentioned something about intolerance, which we'll come to in a second. But he mentions, and I was very surprised when I, to be honest with you, heard this. He mentions intolerance. Let's go to this straight away, actually. This is a man who supports a genocide. This is a man who was going to the IDF, telling the IDF that, you know, when you're doing your atrocities, make sure you hide them and don't take pictures of them. You're going to talk to us about this? You're going to be sanctimonious and talk about minority rights? What minorities are you talking about? The minorities that you prefer, that the white man prefers, that the colonialists prefer. That's the minorities that you're... When it comes to the Palestinians, no, kill them. You're actually telling people to kill them. This is absolutely diabolical. And with that, I will conclude, and you can respond.
There are, some 2 billion Muslims, I think, on the planet. For all the talk I hear of Islam coming from one book, from one word that is unchanged and unaltered, I look to the Palestinian situation and I wonder, where is Islam, or where are the Muslims? The idea that there is some foundational religion here that all of these different people of the same belief system buy into enough to actually stand up for and defend and support their fellow Muslim brother doesn't seem to be there. So one of the most fatal flaws that I find people who are religious commit is this flaw of thinking they stand on firmer ground than they actually do. The idea that there is one holistic, unified view of Islam is probably a view that every individual Muslim would tell you, but maybe not all of them would agree on. I think the same can be said for Christianity, the same can be said for probably any major religion. We can talk about what type of minorities that we prefer, but I mean, if you just take a glance at any Western society, you can see that the incorporation of different groups of people into these societies is much better, and the net is cast much wider than it is in any comparable societies, I would say, in the Middle East or North Africa region.
Okay. He says, where are the Muslims? That's a good question, and I agree with him on that, actually. But there's a distinction to be made between Muslims and Islam. The discussion here is not about Muslims, it's about Islam. That's the first thing. And then he says, okay, well, Western countries are doing a good job with minorities. I mean, liberalism coexisted with colonialism. You must understand this. You cannot look at this time in history and not realize that J.S. Mill was somebody who was actually advising his government how to use racism and supremacy against the colonial empire, against members of the colonial empire, the colonies. So there has been a relationship between racism on the one hand and colonialism on the other, and it's very well known. Look what happened to India. This is a really bad argument. But the question is not about liberalism. It's about atheism, and there is no necessary connection between atheism and liberalism. You can be an atheist communist. You can be an atheist Nazi. You can be an atheist Zionist, as you are. As you are. He is importing liberalism into the discussion to save atheism. Sorry to say, just as, because he's open about this open relationship stuff, just as he imports other men to help with his conjugal duties. You have no business talking about liberalism. You have no business talking about liberalism. We're not talking about liberalism. Liberalism is a philosophy that's not on the debate card today. We are talking about atheism. Tell me how you can get to objective morality from atheism. Tell me how you can get to atoms whizzing around, carbon, which we are, from is to ought, as David Hume would put it. Otherwise, you'd be doing the naturalistic fallacy. If you can't do that, then be a man. It's going to be very hard, sorry to say, for you. Very hard. Be a man and say, I concede the debate. I give up. I throw the white towel. Although maybe you'd be using that white towel for other things. But if you can't do that, honestly, it's done. The debate is finished. And that's all I have to say.
Leave at the top of the second.
So I think at the end of the day, you know, you can talk about the atoms whizzing by, we can talk about the different ways that we think we've proven our God. But again, there's been no progress made on this conversation in the thousands of years that people have debated religion. I think that one of the fatal flaws, again, of religious people is that they stand on, or they think they stand on firmer ground than they actually do. You say that we're not talking about Muslims, we're just talking about Islam. Different people have different interpretations of what Islam means. Some people might think that marriage is between one man and a woman who want to spend the rest of their life together. Other people might believe that marriage is a thing that you solicit to a woman to engage in sex with her and then leave her immediately after. Other people have different views on that. It just depends on how you live your life. The great thing about liberal societies is you're able to practice all of these things however you want in a way that won't involve you getting executed for it. When it comes to deciding, you know, whether a society can have a secular foundation, you know, you can have this conversation of, well, philosophically, you can't connect A to B and B to C and C to D and everything else, but somehow secular societies seem to exist. It's also funny to try to tie liberalism together in with this concept of imperialism when people have been doing imperialism far before the concept of liberalism even existed. I seem to remember caliphates spreading across huge portions of the world, and they didn't need any liberalism to do that. They seem to do that just fine along with Islam. Islam has specific categories of people that aren't part of the main body of the Muslim population. So this idea that you can't have marginalized people in any type of system, I think is a bit silly. The idea that Islam provides some special protection or some special way to run a society that would be superior in terms of producing better outcomes for the people involved, where are those countries? That would be my big question. You know, if we were to argue about the successes of liberalism, I mean, I could point to Muslims existing in a liberal country today with the ability to argue for their Muslim countries. How many Muslim countries can I go to and find liberals arguing the same thing? I think that the idea of free speech, open debate, the ability to own private property, to start a business you want, and to practice whatever religion you want, I think is a special thing that liberal societies have created. And I challenged the opposing speaker to tell me, what are these model Arab societies, what are these model Muslim societies, what are these modern Islamic societies, or these model Islamic societies that you would want us to look more like than any of the countries in the West that you found appropriate to live in?
Sure? Well, that was a bit of a mouthful, Bonelli. But you're going to have to swallow your pride and concede the debate, because actually, he has not been able to connect the dots, unfortunately, for himself. This is a debate about Islam and atheism, not Islam and liberalism, okay? He is assuming a liberal framework. Liberalism does not necessarily connect with atheism in any way whatsoever. Itself, liberalism needs proof and justification for its own truth, which we can do in maybe another debate. I don't think you're going to be wanting to do any other debates after this. But the fact of the matter is this. He says Muslim countries, that's his big question. Where are the Muslim countries? I agree with you. Muslim countries are not following Islam. This is the answer to your question. They are not following. Muslim countries are not following. Look at the Palestine issue. There are non-Muslim countries who have done a better job than the Muslim countries with the Palestine issue. You know, they've acted more Islamic than the Muslim countries have. I agree with this criticism. We are not talking about that. As he's talking about execution and this and that. How dare you talk about execution? You are speaking to the IDF, telling them, if you're going to commit atrocities, don't bring your phone out. You are in no position whatsoever to talk about rights to us today. No position. Zero. Your sanctimony is gone, and you are finished, I'm sorry to say.
As much as the fellow speaker wants to paint me as a Zionist Israeli person, I've never given a speech to the IDF. I don't think they would much want my advice or my criticisms. Not a fan of Netanyahu, never have been. We can get into that later if you'd like. You're talking about the ability to connect atheism to liberal society, and you're saying that I'm simply begging that I'm simply asserting that it must be true for one liberal society to exist, that there must be some atheist foundation. But I guess my question to you would be, how could you have a foundation to a society that is some kind of religion that also allots for other religions to practice themselves in identical ways? When religions tend to be mutually exclusive, especially the Abrahamic ones, when they say that my holy book, my scripture, my God, my interpretation is the correct one, how do you truly have a society where you allow for other people to practice their religious beliefs? I challenge you, I'm curious, in your worldview, in the ideal Islamic country, would you allow people to draw pictures of the Prophet? Would you allow people to practice whatever religion they want? Would you allow people to do things that, so long as they comport with the basic laws that we all agree on when it comes to, things like don't steal, don't murder, don't do, obvious crimes we all agree on, would you allow in your ideal Islamic society all of these other religions to practice in the same way that in a liberal society, in an atheist society, in a secularly built society, other religions are able to practice?
He asked me a series of questions, and he said that, would you allow the drawing of the Prophet? Would you allow this? Would you allow that? In the same way as liberal societies. Why should it be the same way? You haven't proven liberalism is true, and you haven't proven that atheism is true. You've given us no arguments for anything. And then he says, free speech. Well, it's very interesting he mentions free speech, because I'm going through some of his content, and he was making an argument for child. And he, in fact, said that there's a pragmatic case for child. So, yes, the Muslim countries would actually ban something like that. And that is an inhibition to the free speech people like you, atheist morality, would bring to the table. Child banned in the Muslim countries, for example. Maybe that will put you in trouble or this and that, because I know you sent some pictures to that person, whatever. I don't know what's going on. I'm surprised you're even here today, so quite frankly. I was thinking whether or not I should humiliate you, but I was worried that maybe you enjoy it. It's over here, man. You haven't answered any of my questions. I'm asking you, how do you connect atheist morality with liberalism? There is no answer, there's no connection. So all of your subsequent questions are a waste of time. Because you are a puny, perverse, yes, I'm sorry to say puny, perverse, pro-genocide, pipsqueak of an individual. This is the case. And there's nothing more to be said about you.
I would have prepared more personal insults if I knew that was the direction we were taking this, but okay. Again, I will say, you're saying that I haven't connected atheism to a liberal society, but I notice that you failed to answer my question of what types of behaviors would you allow in your model Islamic society without having the foundation as some secular system, without being able to point to laws, without being able to point to a system of governance that doesn't originate from some holy book. I don't know how you can say that a liberal society, one that allows for all religions to practice equally, isn't necessarily a society that doesn't take a normative position on what religion is true or what religion is false. Again, there is a reason why you have come to this country, and while you might insult me and call me a lot of names, which funny enough is an indication that the person doesn't feel confident in the material, I guess, that they're talking about, you have the right to do that, and you're able to do that here as I don't know if you were born in this country, if you're an immigrant to this country, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I don't think that you would be able to get away with the same type of behavior in the countries that you seem to want to model this one or other Western countries out of. Again, I ask you, if you think that there is a better way to build a country with an Islamic foundation, where are these countries? It seems like they fell in the past, they haven't emerged again. If you're telling me that atheism is not the model or is not the foundation for a secular liberal society that allows for other religions to practice equally, well then tell me, what is the religious foundation for that society? How can you have a society that allows for multiple religions to practice, all of them to be treated in an equal manner by the laws and the government, but say that that society takes some position on religion and that the society itself isn't atheist or isn't liberal? You brought up this idea earlier. It's funny, you used an analogy of a mother birthing herself or a child having two mothers. We can look, for instance, to children born today. That doesn't involve any religious aspect. It doesn't involve a God. It doesn't involve anything else. We know the process by how that works. We don't need religion right now to explain the things that are happening in society. For all the predictions that Mohammed or anybody else supposedly made about things in society, I don't see his name on any research papers. I haven't seen him publish anything in Nature or Science Weekly. I don't really know what his predictions are doing that are relevant today. I know that, he was the head of a bunch of caliphates or started these that eventually fell and no longer exist. So I'm just curious if in your push to have Islam be the model for Western society, again, where are these countries that you want to model, Western countries off of? And if my foundation for a liberal society is not an atheist one, then tell me, what religion am I pointing to in order to have the societies that exist?
There's
So I think that one of the fatal flaws that Western countries have made, especially the United States, is we don't really ask ourselves, what does it mean in my country to be an American? I think that there are good reasons to celebrate immigration. You can look at the numbers side, you can look at the economic impacts, the fiscal impacts, the impacts to business and everything else, and you would say, well, immigration is beneficial there. You can look at certain aspects of culture and say that we're enriched when it comes to foods or entertainments or arts, and you say there's an enrichment there. But what does it mean to actually be an American? What is the core base of values that all of us should be sharing? When I look at countries in the West today, especially after the Syrian refugee crisis, especially 2013 onwards, especially post-Brexit in the United Kingdom, I feel like we haven't come together in a long time in a lot of these countries, especially in mine. I can't speak as much for yours, but we haven't come together and asked ourselves, what does it mean to be a member of our nation, and what kind of values should we be looking for from people that are coming to our nation? Again, I will, hearkening back to the last subject, I like the concept of liberalism as a secular government because as long as we share some core values that we're all working and building towards, some concept of a nation that we're working and building towards, liberalism provides a lot of different paths to get there. A Muslim like Mamdani in New York can be the mayor of New York City, which is a wonderful thing. We have evangelical Christians in the United States. I would say that they're less wonderful things, but I'm glad that they have the right to exist. We have secular atheists. We've got Zionists and non-Zionist Jews. We've got all sorts of different types of people that can exist under this umbrella, all working towards a common goal. I think that when you have people that are proponents of immigration, I think that it's good to take a step back sometimes and think, well, what do we want our country to look like? What kind of people should we want to come here? And that doesn't just mean people that look or think like us. It means people that are building towards some kind of common goal. And I think for people that are harshly critical of immigration, I think it's good for them to ask the same question. Do I want nobody coming here because they don't look like me or because they don't think exactly like me? And what kind of restrictions would I draw on immigrants coming here that I wouldn't also restrict on my own countrymen? I notice sometimes in the United States, for instance, that a lot of conservatives will talk about how we want to restrict immigration from people that have A, B, and C or X, Y, and Z thoughts that they feel like aren't aligned with American values. But I would point to a lot of conservatives in the United States, and I would say that your disregard for rule of law or the Constitution doesn't align with our values. So I think that if you're going to have a view on immigration, I think that you should have first a view on what your nation is and what it looks like, and then you should try to incorporate more and more people as long as you're building towards that final project or vision.
Well, I think with this one, the interlocutor and I'm not going to disagree that much as we did in the previous one. But what I will say is that when we think about it, when we talk about immigration and what's happening now in the media, especially vis-a-vis Muslim immigration, Muslim immigrants, the sons of immigrants. I mean, he asked me, you came to this country. I didn't come to this country. I was born in this country. You're the one who came, sorry to say, to this country as a visitor. You don't have to be white to be actually somebody who belongs to this country. And that's the point. Look, people are talking about grooming gangs, unemployment, criminality, and these kind of things vis-a-vis the Muslim population. But when was the last time you heard that despite a 6% population, the Muslims are 6% of this country, that they constitute 22%, according to Christie Foundation, NHS Foundation, of the medical professionals in the NHS. In fact, 51% of the NHS are comprised of people who are immigrants or the sons of immigrants. If you remove that, you will have a crisis so large, it will be as if Britain went into war. You cannot. People have this discussion about immigration. They disregard the fact, for example, that Muslims, once again, are 4 times, according to Charity UK, more likely to give to charity than their non-Muslim counterpart. Muslims contribute 70 billion per year to the UK economy, which is equivalent to Birmingham and Manchester combined, the output of those two things. Now, if you remove all those contributions, you will have a cascading impact in Britain that is so far-reaching that it will dent the economy and it will bring death and destruction upon the people of Britain. The question isn't about, oh, we can have this discussion about immigration. You need us. You need the immigrants. Don't speak in a position of privilege as if we can't have it. You actually need the immigrants. You're in a position where you are dependent on immigrants. This country is dependent on immigrants and the sons of immigrants. And then he talks about the Syrian refugee crisis. I don't even know what point he made, frankly. Sorry, I wasn't listening very clearly. And the microphone is not that clear for me. But, exactly, Syrian refugee crisis. If you support a genocide in Palestine, you support it, and people then run away from Palestine to try to come to the West, then you are the architects of your own complaints. You are creating the conditions of your own complaints. In other words, if the Western powers decide to go into these different countries, like Iraq, like Afghanistan, like Syria, like Libya, like Palestine, or help those who are doing it, and then those people that start fleeing and coming to Europe, you created this issue. So what do you want to do with these people? You either bomb them when they're there, when they try and run away, you say no to them as well. Sorry to say, what kind of a situation is this? What kind of situation is it? Let's talk about integration and assimilation. Unemployment. According to the BBC, if you have a Muslim name, you're 3 times less likely to be employed by the same job for the same position. So I would say, yes, it's true, there are some legitimate concerns with immigration. There are legitimate concerns with minority groups. I'm not going to deny that. And there has to be some concession made. There are. There are things we have to work on, as every community in Britain. But at the same time, the way forward is there to be a reciprocity between the government or the dominant population and these minority groups. And there needs to be a reduction to the barriers of discrimination.
So I think we maybe agree on a bit of immigration, although I think the priorities are a little bit different in terms of certain groups of people. When I'm having conversations or debates on immigration, one of the things I tend to look for is how much people mix up groups of people or how wide of a net people cast when they talk about certain groups of people. So I can't speak to the particular numbers on immigration in the United Kingdom, but I do think it was interesting that it seemed like simultaneously a very high percentage of immigrants, maybe Muslims in particular, were doctors, but also a very high percentage of people, or a much higher percentage of people than named Mohammed, are unemployed. So clearly we're talking about different groups of immigrants here, and I think it's probably worth it to pay attention to different groups of immigrants. I think that one of the big mistakes that people have made is in allowing immigrants to come up and improve your economy. The economy improving is not the same thing as life for an individual improving. And sometimes there are ways to bring in immigrants to a country where the overall economy improves, but the improvement is slight over the entire economy, but the destruction to parts of the economy are very concentrated and are very noticed. And especially in the United States, we have issues along our manufacturing sector where you can see concentrated damage that different types of immigration have caused. While the entire country might benefit, the people that are in those damaged sectors will obviously feel like they've been abandoned by their nation, by their country, and I think there's a legitimate grievance there that should be addressed. So as long as you are balancing out immigration, the types of immigrants you want to come in, it's important to distinguish different types of immigrants from other types of immigrants. A doctor who wants to come to the UK or the United States from Syria is going to be a lot different than an asylum seeker coming from North Africa, is going to be a lot different than a PhD researcher coming from Kenya, is going to be a lot different than a supposed asylum seeker from South Africa. All of these people are different, and you have to look at them in kind of their disparate groups and, assess which ones you want in your country and how you want them to contribute. And I'm very hesitant to take advice or critique from somebody talking about immigration who's very quick to lump all of these groups together and imply that we should treat all of them somewhat equally.
Yeah, so unemployment was mentioned again. And as I mentioned, look, when it comes to criminality and unemployment, this is the main argument that people make against immigrants or migrants or ethnic minorities, right? The fact is, there are 2 major predictors for those things, okay? Number 1 is being a man. If you are a man, you are more likely to be a criminal, okay? Maybe 10 times more likely than a woman. No one's going to ban men from the country, okay? No one's going to say, okay, the UK, no men are allowed in, because actually you're represented to a degree of 10 to or 100 to 1, whatever it may be, in prisons. So there has to be some discussion about, okay, well, what are the parameters now? The second predictor is actually socioeconomics. Now, in the UK and in Western Europe, the issue is that it's different to the way it happened in the United States. When the United States people brought people in for immigration, they had a more select criterion. Okay, they brought in middle-class people. That's why there's no talk of grooming gangs in Pakistani communities in California. There's no talk of it whatsoever. Why? Because they're middle class. Because they're doctors and engineers. In other words, when you're poorer, you're more likely to commit more crimes in certain areas, regardless of race, religion, or whatever it may be. Wealth is the predictor. It's socioeconomics. So it's not, oh, these black people are coming in and they're doing this. These Mexican people, no. When you get a black man and a white man who have the same money, they're likely to commit the same crimes and be unemployed in the same level, etc., etc. So the point is, the immigration thing has missed the colonial aspect. Britain's history with colonialism meant that it called the people from ex-colonies to come into Britain as unskilled labor after the World War in order to fix the country. They can't just do that and then tell them to leave afterwards. And hence, the reason why you've got people from Pakistan or from Jamaica or from whatever, India, in England, is because they were ex-colonies and that these people were used as unskilled labor. And because they're in that socioeconomic bracket, they will be more likely in some areas to commit certain crimes or to be unemployed just by virtue of socioeconomics. But that's not an argument against Islam. It's not an argument against a race realist argument or whatever it may be, because that's where it's veering towards. That's the right-wing argument, that they're doing it because of their religion. They're doing it because of their race. And that's what we should be against, because actually the data is against all of that. So when we're having the discussion about immigration, the connection, the causal connection between these aspects which they consider to be wrong, on the one hand, and what's going on in someone's religion or someone's race on the other, is there is no connection. And the connection is actually a socioeconomic one.
I don't think I disagreed much with what was said. I will say that when you're talking about different groups of immigrants, though, it's important that morality enters the conversation depending on which groups of immigrants that we are talking about. I think that there's a mistake sometimes that when we point to immigration, we only talk about the benefits, but then we talk about different groups of immigrants, and then sometimes we speak of obligations that we have to those immigrants. In the United States, typically most of the immigrants that we bring in are just by virtue of us having oceans separating us from the rest of the world. They're going to be more wealthy, they're going to be higher educated. You're selecting from these kind of higher echelons of society. When these people come in, the expectation for my country, and the expectation for any country, I would imagine for everyone to come in, is that on net, you're going to benefit the country in a variety of ways. I don't think that that same expectation should be levied, though, towards people that are seeking asylum or for people that are fleeing disaster. I think that sometimes when people, again, are looking at all of these different groups the same, I think that it's okay to say that there are going to be some groups that, at least for some period of time, either while they're there or if they stay there, are going to be at least fiscal or budget drains on your society because the situation that they're coming from isn't one that built them to be an economic unit or powerhouse that can contribute to your country. The obligations that we have towards different groups of immigrants, the obligations that we have towards asylum seekers should be as successful and, relatively speaking, wealthy countries that we can take some amount of people in. It's our goodwill for the world. You can even argue to, I would argue to a much smaller extent, because I don't buy into the colonialist arguments as much, but you can argue that because of the West's impact on other parts of the world, that we have some obligation as well to take care of people that might be fleeing disaster from there, especially places in the Middle East. But that being said, we have to be able to talk about all of these different groups, the different expectations that we have of these groups, and then the different ways morally that we would approach these groups in terms of how we would allow them into our society, and then how we would incorporate them into our society, what our expectations of them would be, and what our expectations of our own country would be with regards to the treatment of those groups of people.
Sure. So with this, I mean, he mentions the expectations and he talks about morality, and we've already had this discussion. He can't even establish what morality is or how it's true or anything like that. He's assuming the truth of his worldview without arguing for it, which is pathetic, actually. This is a debate. You're meant to actually argue for your worldview, whether it's liberalism or atheism. There's no evidence given. But the second thing is that if people have this view, like, for example, they say, well, Muslims, conservative Muslims, will be against the liberal paradigm in these areas. The same thing applies for Jews then. Because frankly, the most two closest religions are strict conservative Muslims and strict conservative Jews. If you want to have one policy for one, don't not have the other policy for the other, because that's a double standard. But we have never heard him speak about that. In fact, he supports European Jewish immigration into Palestine. So it's not like he's against immigration. I mean, he's not really that against immigration anyway, but the point is, it's about who gets to benefit. That's really the bottom line, isn't it? If Europeans get to benefit, it's okay, no problem. There's no questions asked. You can even build settlements. No problem. You can even steal someone's home. If you're a European Jewish immigrant going into Palestine, immigration is fine. But if you're someone coming into the UK, no, there's a discussion about expectations now, actually. If you're seeking asylum, are you? What do you mean seeking asylum? You created these wars. You bombed these people. They're running for their life. And now, before you come in, tell us what you're going to bring to the table. Is this a joke? Is this some kind of is this satire? This is pathetic, frankly. No argument has been given. If you don't want asylum seekers and refugees in these European countries, then don't create wars in those countries. We are here because they were there. That's the reality of the situation. Prevention is better than cure. Don't create a disaster and then ask, why is it happening? You created it with your own hands.
Yeah, again, I mean, I don't really disagree much, but I will say that if you're going to have a conversation then about different groups of immigrants coming in, just be honest about what the expectations are and be honest about how you expect them to immigrate into your society and integrate into your society. You can't, on one hand, say that we have caused disasters in regions of the world and now we expect asylum seekers to come because we owe it to them, and then in the next breath say, well, actually, all of these people are going to contribute on net to society at the same time. The first thing is a moral obligation that we would have to take care of a group of people. The second is just an economic trade, and our expectations and our approach to both of things could be wildly different. I don't know if we're going to get into Israel-Palestine more in the question section. Obviously, the other speaker here has a lot of opinions on that. But yeah, I would say broadly we probably agree on immigration. Just when you're having conversations about immigration, make sure that you're treating every group differently. Make sure that you're having an honest conversation about what your expectations are of each group and what your expectations are for those groups once they're in your country and how your country should treat those groups.
Well, I mean, that's where that's... Sorry? Sure. I mean, look, in the Western ethical tradition, you'll be aware of this. There's three main schools of thought, right? There is consequentialism, there is deontological ethics, and then there's virtue ethics of the ancients. And all three of them attempt to tell us how you can derive values, okay, without religion. That was, in fact, exactly what Kant tried to do through his categorical imperative, his hypothetical imperative, the universality of his laws, etc. The issue is this. The issue is with those three systems that are not religious systems, whether it's Kantian or deontological, whether it's consequentialist, utilitarian, which is a sub-branch of that, or whether it's virtue ethics, none of them have a way of proving themselves as objective moralities. This is the problem. There is no way of, and they don't even, some of them don't claim that. Some of them don't even claim that they're objective moralities. So the point I'm making today is, when you talk about foundations and stuff like that, and that we all have to agree, the definition of an objective morality is that despite people's opinion, this thing will stay the same. Whereas subjective morality is, it's like that because of people's opinion. So 2 + 2 = 4 will remain as 2 + 2 = 4, even though there's no one on the planet. So you cannot get this, as John Mackey said. John Mackey wrote a very good, he's an atheist himself, book on ethics, called Ethics actually. And at the end of it, he mentioned the following. He said that the only way you can do that is through a list from God. And he said that as an atheist.
So I would approach religion and I would approach morality for people. When I think of meta-ethics, when I think of what is goodness, I take an intuitive view of it. I don't think it's a coincidence that almost every religion, almost every culture seems to arrive at these similar values, these similar understandings of what's good and what's not good. There are issues around the edges, around how we live our lives, especially around, say, LGBT issues, or maybe the particular ways that we engage with each other, but there seem to be a core set of principles that emerge. As a boring materialist, I would say, from the human biology. I don't think it's a coincidence that when you grow up in a Muslim household, you tend to be Muslim. I don't think it's a coincidence when you grow up in a Christian household, you tend to be Christian. And every other religion typically follows suit. I think that we're largely products of our environment. But I would say that the shared values that we tend to have, even from one culture to the next, even from one religion to the next, is because there is an intuitive understanding that we all have about what is good and what is not good. The systems that the other speaker brought up, these kind of like normative ethical models, are different ways that you can try to apply a meta-ethical understanding of the world into how you can live a better life. And, you know, we can have disagreements around the edges on that. Everybody's a consequentialist until it comes time to go to the hospital and a doctor wants to harvest your organs to save 5 other people. Everybody's a deontologist until the Nazis knocking at your door, asking if there's a Jew in the basement. The reality is I think we all use intuition much more than we're willing to admit. And to center back on one of the first things I said in this conversation, religious people find themselves standing, or they believe they're standing on much firmer ground than they ever actually are. In the world of Christianity, even I as a Catholic, my own archdiocese, my own churches, and my own city would have disagreements on what it meant to be a moral follower of Christ. What kind of people do we allow to be allowed to have in different parts of our church? When it comes to Islam, there are different understandings of whether or not you can trace your descendants from, Mohammed or whatever, or your different types of Shia Sunni countries, or different types of how you practice religion in your different countries, the different Muslims that we have in the United States compared to even the ones that are in Europe. So even from a position of objective morality or objective understandings of the world, there's still billions of people that have produced a plethora of different beliefs concerning the system. So if there is some religion that's able to guide people towards some consistent moral belief, that religion must just have a member of one, or I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I mean, I did say that was relative, legally relative. Legally relative. In other words, in the UK, the age of consent is 16. In the US, it might be 18. In Russia, it might be 14. Which means that, by definition, this is a factual statement, you're a pedophile with different parameters if you go to different countries. I don't think that's a controversial statement at all, my friend. As for what he said, defending child through consequentialism, one of your favorite ethical systems, that is not something about whether or not something is objectively the case of a factual statement. That is a moral prescriptive thing. He's saying you can watch child, and it actually could reduce the amount of actual instances of pedophilia, and therefore you can make a pragmatic case for it. That's number one. Number two, when he was giving his answer, he committed 2 fallacies. One of them was called the category mistake fallacy. So he says we intuit morals. That's epistemology. We're not talking about the epistemological state. I agree with that, by the way. We do intuit some morality. We're talking about the ontological status of morality. How morality, qua morality, can actually be given objectivity. From what source is it given objectivity? That's the first thing. The second fallacy that he committed was the, if you want to call it, the genetic fallacy, actually. Because of something's origin, it must be wrong. Or because Muslims are born into, Muslim families are more, born like this, or Christian families. So the same thing with atheism and liberalism. It doesn't mean it's wrong, therefore it's wrong. It's a weak argument, really weak. Very weak. Very weak. Yeah? And then furthermore, he's mentioned interpretations. There's so many interpretations of how many people killed JFK. Was it this guy, that guy? It doesn't mean no one killed him. Just because there's so many interpretations of story doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
I'm going to take the bold stance and say bad, not good. I would also agree that child bad and not good. Thank you. Yeah, I guess if we want to bring up videos or whatever debates I've had in the past, there was a man named Amosi who I think is currently in prison for abusing children, is my understanding. I don't know if he's out yet or not. We had a conversation on whether or not pedophilia was acceptable. Again, I took the brave stance that I don't think it's acceptable, and the one hypothesis that he proposed to me was something along the lines of, if there was older, material of children and it could help not abuse children or whatever, is this an okay thing? And I said, maybe, I don't know, but I don't even know if you could do the research for that. But the idea of having some pro-pedophilia stance that I have when, again, the opposing speaker is saying that pedophilia is relative, I think is an interesting line of argumentation to go down. If you want to look at explicit videos of mine or whatever, apparently I should open an OnlyFans. There seems to be a lot of interest around that. I have not had any sexual relations with Nick Fuentes yet, so who knows, maybe in the future we'll see how that goes. But thank you, I appreciate the fandom.
Hijab, you've been very clear that you think it's a genocide. Destiny, you acknowledge the presence of war crimes. You spoke to the IDF and told them people don't like seeing war crimes, so they should just turn their cameras off and have a good time. You did say that you didn't give a speech to the IDF either, but it's on video, so we know that happened. You also tweeted in 2024 in February that if Israel wanted to genocide Palestinians, then they would only exist in history books. So I'm just wondering if you stand by your genocide denial, and I'd like to know what both of you would refer to as, if not genocide, which is common consensus by scholars.
So it's hard to hear with the echo, but I think there was a reference to the when I was invited by Yoav Golan himself to give a conversation, I guess, to the IDF. This was a group of fans of mine. At the time, there were pictures circulating where, I guess, soldiers were taking pictures in dresses, and the question had to do with communicating yourself to the Western world. And I said, taking pictures like this is obviously really stupid. If you want to spin this into me saying if you're going to commit war crimes, do it off camera, I mean, you can do that. That's fine. It's boring to me. This is inconsistent with every belief I've ever held in my life. But you're free to strawman me in whatever way makes you feel better about yourself. When it comes to the analysis of the region and whether or not it's a genocide, personally, I think this is a question for the International Court of Justice and maybe historians. I think that people that want to call it a genocide are looking too hard to weigh into some word or term or some international definition that is somehow going to bring peace to the region. And I think it does a disservice to the people there, and I think that it tries to short-circuit the argument of what does a final resolution look like when we're just screaming apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. I think that the push in the West oftentimes that people look for when they talk about peace, when they talk about no more killing, is a very Western-centric view that people involved in conflict don't always necessarily share. When it comes to Ukraine, the calls for peace are usually from the Russian side saying, well, we need peace so that we can take 25% of this country. Personally, I believe that calls for just peace in Israel-Palestine is something that Netanyahu supports, because if you read this 20-point plan that's been floated, it gives him essentially every single thing that he wants in the region. I think that once the bombs stop falling and once Netanyahu works on his reform of education in the Gaza Strip, whatever that means, when he works on his reform of the Palestinian Authority into being less radical, whatever that means, and then when he looks at all of the other things that he's been granted by the United States in order to build whatever two separate societies that he wants, I think that what's happened is even as we approach an end to this conflict, Netanyahu's gotten everything he wants, and this claim of genocide hasn't supported the Palestinian people there in any way, size, shape, or form.
Well, first of all, about the child pornography aspect, he hasn't denied that he said that. But more significantly, he said the following: molesting kids is not pedophilia. That's a direct quote from you. So let's not play games here today. Your atheistic morality is not granting you any favors today. Look, if he cared about kids, why is he supporting a government? Why, if, yeah, well, I will answer. I will answer. Yeah, I will answer. I will answer. I will answer. Supporting a government that's killed 20,000 kids. 20,000 kids. We've seen the pictures of them being incinerated and burned and all these kinds of things. And here you're talking about minorities and minority rights and morality and all these kinds of things. And he denies the fact that there's apartheid in Israel, when in fact the only ones who can return to Israel are Jews. How do you explain that there's no apartheid in Israel when there are laws that discriminate on the basis of ethnicity? Isn't that what you were just lecturing us about? You were just telling us it has to be equal, it has to be this. You've never once condemned the IDF for that. You've never once condemned Israel for that. You know why? Because you're selective in your use of rights and minority rights. It's the people that you want to have those rights. But 20,000 children being incinerated, people being displaced, not a word of condemnation, pin drop silence. And that's why no one can ever take you seriously again. It's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, the misconception is that the only sources of Sharia are the Quran and the Sunnah or the Hadith. That's not actually the case. I mean, Najmuddin al-Tufi, who is a scholar, 8th century scholar, he said that there are 11 different sources of the Sharia. 11 different. And one of them is actually maslaha and mafsada, or the idea of detriments and harms. which introduces a kind of consequentialism, actually. There is a kind of consequentialism in Islam. And there are principles which are similar to the liberal tradition in Islam, but they operate on a different priority. So, for example, the harm principle, we have a harm principle as well. And it's based on the words of the Prophet. He says, "La darar wa la dirar," which means that there is no harming or reciprocating harm. So there is that. And so, where there isn't an exact thing that is, for example, mentioned in the Quran about a specific issue that's happening today, then what the jurists will do is that they'll use one of those principles. Okay, what is this thing? Is it harmful to the people? Is it not harmful to them, etc.? And then they will make a ruling on the basis of that. So that answers the first question. In terms of Saudi and the driving, I mean, first and foremost, there's no verse in the Quran that says anything about women cannot drive. There's no hadith that, in fact, there's hadith showing that women were riding the horse. It's the opposite. Yeah. So what was happening in Saudi was something which is a cultural thing in Saudi Arabia. Okay. Just like in Afghanistan, they do things which are not Islamic. Taliban, sometimes they'll do something that's not Islamic. Not every government that claims to do something in the name of Islam is doing that because of the name of Islam. Okay. So the point is that our point of defense is we defend that which is in the Quran, that which is in the Sunnah. And yes, we have principles of jurisprudence which basically govern all the things that are not in those things, including, all those things that you mentioned and so on and so forth. So there is, I would call it a Sharia consequentialism, but it's not, it follows a different priority than, let's say, liberal consequentialism or whatever it may be.
This is kind of why I find the objective morality of religion a little bit intellectually bankrupt. I feel like all you've done is you've kicked the question of subjectivity down the road from philosophers that you make fun of by saying they have no objective foundation for any of their moral truth to what you call your religious scholars who either they lack access to the objective foundation of truth or they also don't have objective truth, I guess, available to them despite the fact that the Quran is written in one language and is an unchanging document. So when it comes to, when it comes to making evaluations on how to, rule things as being legal, how to rule things as being illegal, or how to evaluate these from a moral perspective, the superiority, I would say, from a secular framework is that we can sit down and we can have conversations about what do we think builds towards a better society, what do we think are the values that we all share, that we can kind of that we can kind of agree on that we should or shouldn't have a thing. So when it comes to AI-generated child porn is a topic that I see that gets brought up in some communities. It's a challenging question for a variety of reasons. Maybe more relevant or a thing that's been discussed in the past are drawings of. There are different names for these, for animated, depictions of children or whatever. And, is it a crime if there isn't a victim? Is it a crime if it leads to more victimization? If we say yes, does that mean that if we have violent media, that's considered bad because that could lead to more violence? There's like a huge mix of consequentialist belief and deontological belief. And I think sorting that out needs a bunch of people to sit down and to honestly, be able to say, this is a tough question, and we're going to sit here and we're going to write on and we're going to argue back and forth, and we're going to see at the end of the day how many people we can convince of what we believe to be the morally correct option here. I prefer the secular or atheist view of that, because at the end of the day you can honestly say you're having that conversation rather than having 10 different people with 10 different ideas on it say all of them have objective truth about it.